In the last hour, Britain has agreed its first bespoke post-Brexit trade deal with Australia.
Yes, it means British products such as cars, Scotch whisky, biscuits and ceramics will now be cheaper to sell in Australia.
The Australian Prime Minister, pictured there with our Prime Minister, formally agreed the deal in Downing Street this morning, just as was predicted yesterday live on GB News by the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, when he was here. Well, let's turn to Matthew Lesh. Coincidentally is Australian, but based in London at the Adam Smith Institute, the free market think tank. Adam, welcome to you. It's no crime to be Australian. We're very glad to have you here today. What do you make of this deal?
Look, I'm very excited about it. I think this is quite a big achievement for the UK and is really defining what a global Britain means. This is the first deal that's been agreed from scratch. It's a comprehensive effort. It's going to give Brits tariff-free access to Australian wine, swimwear, confectionery, according to the government, saving households £34 million a year. But there's also huge opportunities for British producers into Australia, with tariffs being removed on British cars and Scotch whisky. For a young person in the UK, I'm very excited about the opportunities that are going to be provided by making it easier to move between countries. They're going to increase the age in which you can access the kind of youth visa systems, as well as reducing the barriers. And even more broadly, there's been a lot of talk about farming, but really what is going to make the most difference in this deal in terms of trade is the financial services and tech sectors. And there's some quite comprehensive new arrangements that have been signed between Australia and the UK that are going to make that kind of trade much easier for the services industry, and is going to
the thing is, Matthew, you know what tugs the heartstrings, don't you? I mean, there'll be the people thinking, oh, that's great for the city and the bankers, but what about the poor family farmers, the people struggling with their dairy farms? Actually, it's not so much the dairy farms that are under threat here. It's the beef farmers, it's the upland hill farmers as well. How can you possibly compete with all the attendant costs of running a Lake District sheep farm with the massive hill stations or sheep stations and cattle ranches of Australia? It's not a fair fight.
Look, I think it absolutely is a fair fight. Australia follows similar, if not identical, standards to the UK, particularly for export. And I think it's a myth that's been spread that Australia is about to flood the British market with Australian beef. In the first instance, there's actually a separate supply chain that can only be supplied to the EU and the UK from Australia, and it's actually more expensive to produce, as well as there's of course huge shipping costs. So we're talking about a relatively small amount.
Yeah, well, Matthew, you know the argument on this, don't you? Small now, but of course this may provide the template for deals with South American countries, possibly the big one with the United States as well. And I just wonder, from the Adam Smith free market perspective, is there an argument that says, look, there has to be parts of the economy which we consider to be part of the strategic interest? I keep banging on about this point, but I think it's worth banging on about that. If COVID has taught us anything, it is about the fragility of some of our supply chains and our logistics, our just-in-time logistics. And the next virus may not be biological, it may be digital, and then suddenly those just-in-time supply chains, when it comes to the most important thing of all that we get into the country, namely food, we only produce about half of our food in this country, is in serious jeopardy. We have to protect our farmers, not because they're cuddly and they evoke feelings of nostalgia, but because they're vital to keeping us alive.
Well, look, as you very well know, Britain's been a net importer of food for a few hundred years, and that served British people extremely well. It served consumers well in terms of...
Well, it was tough during the war, Matthew, when people had to dig up their allotments and, plant food in their gardens because we couldn't get food into the country.
I think the key point here, of course, is that what is most important when it comes to security is actually supply chain diversity. It's not having all your food and produce coming from one source, but coming as many sources as possible, be it the EU or the US or South America, and now a little bit more from Australia. That's actually what really matters. If there's a bad harvest in the UK can import from elsewhere in the world. If there's a bad harvest in Spain, they can import from France. It's about the diversity of where you're getting your produce from that actually causes the security. And we actually saw that during COVID as well. There's been some quite interesting studies that suggested that companies that import from a diversity of places from all over the world were actually able to maintain their production levels, whilst if they were dependent on places that were disrupted during COVID, there was actually less ability to keep their production going. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all that the UK has a diversity of food sources. I think that's a win for British consumers. It's a win for British producers as well, of course, because producers depend on a lot of imports from all over the world. We shouldn't forget that even British cars, for example, excellent product, but of course depend on supply chains from right across the world, and they need that access to that specialty of knowledge and understanding and production in order to make it work. If you just try to in-source everything into country, it might sound nice in theory, and I think instinctively we like the idea of it, but you're actually going to cause a lot more points of danger if you're just dependent on a small supply chain. It's about having a lot of different places you can access goods from, including food, that will keep Britain fed. And I think we saw that during COVID as well. It felt like that there was going to be shortages, but they weren't in the end because we had so many places to get food from.
What can we expect in terms of what this means for immigration to Australia? We know that Australia has rather stringent immigration rules. I mean, can we expect Britain to get a specialised deal for people and students as well, actually, not just people wanting to immigrate?
It's yes or no, Matthew. We're almost out of time. 10 seconds. Off you go.
Yes, it will be easier to move, particularly for young people. The visas are being extended to make it much easier.
Matthew Lesh from Adam Smith. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Good morning. You're watching Brazier and Maroki on GB News.